Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Ekman of Gold Derby. I am very excited to sit here with Benjamin Cavell, the showrunner, executive producer, writer on The Stand from Paramount Plus, the latest adaptation of Stephen King's great epic story of good versus evil. And, one of the most special things, actually, Benjamin, about this new limited series is Stephen King's involvement. And you had the chance to get to tell a new coda to the story. He wrote the final episode and has a new ending to this beloved story that you got to tell for the first time, really. So, what was that process like collaborating with him on this new ending?
You know, it was terrific. It wasn't clear from the beginning that he was necessarily going to write the coda. I mean, he sort of told us that he had, a continuation of the story that he'd been planning, but maybe he was going to kind of give us the germ of it and we were going to run with it. And then really after he saw the first couple drafts of what we were doing, and he was convinced by them and was very generous about them, and felt like, what, these guys clearly have a point of view and a real handle on the story they're telling and the way they're adapting the book. And I want to trust them to take this thing that's been germinating for decades for him. And that, it was such I mean, beyond the fact that, yes, we got to actually do it and bring it to life. And, so proud of it. It was also such a vote of confidence for all of us, because it was, fairly early on in the process. We had just written the first two episodes, and for him to really embrace what we were doing in that way and say, I want you guys to tell the continuation of what may be his most beloved book. I mean, it's certainly one of them. It just gave us so much confidence that we were telling a really that we were telling the story that he's created in a really righteous way that did justice to it, but also kind of made it new and our own. So it was just, honestly, the Stephen King experience was such a pleasure. I mean, obviously he has a reputation of being pretty upfront about, his feelings about adaptations of his work. And, he's pretty upfront about the ones that he doesn't like, and also about the ones that he does. And it's lovely to be in that category.
Good to be in the positive category.
Totally.
Yeah. And this series does take a different sort of approach with the storytelling, because it has sort of a nonlinear approach, where we sort of jump into already the pandemic's happening, then we jump back to different characters, meeting them sort of a pair at a time. What was the impetus for this nonlinear structure?
You know, it's funny because I mean, everybody asks about it, and it feels like, such a big decision and such a big departure. It's sort of, I don't know. We came to it. Certainly, I came to it thinking that was the way to go, and because, look, we had no idea that we were going to be releasing the show in the midst of what we've all been in the midst of, but it did seem clear to us even then in 2018 that we didn't want to make an audience sit through 3 episodes of the world dying before we got to what is really the meat of our story. The Stand, to me, sounds crazy to say, but the Stand is really not a story about a pandemic. It's really about what comes after, and this elemental struggle for the soul of what remains, and this question about sort of how do you rebuild humanity. I mean, what if you have the chance to sort of push the reset button on human civilization and human society? Like, what is the philosophy by which you build it back? I mean, what these very fundamental questions, about what is a society? What does a society owe to the individuals who make it up? What do the individuals owe to the society in return? What do individuals owe to each other? It's funny because I feel as though all those questions have become so much more relevant even than when King first wrote the book. I mean, the idea of a sort of return to, a crumbling of, institutions that we've just taken for granted, certainly in this country, seems much closer to our day-to-day lives than it did, I think, in 1978. I mean, it was 2 years old, so I don't remember 1978 terribly well, but it just seems to me that people are talking about that stuff so much more than they were when I was growing up. And it felt like that was really, that's the heart of the story. And it felt like that was really the honest place to start our adaptation after the pandemic has kind of emptied out the world, so that, ultimately so that it's empty enough for our heroes to walk to Mordor. I mean, King has been very upfront about the idea that the book is in part his attempt to do Lord of the Rings in the United States. And, Captain Trips is sort of the mechanism by which the world gets emptied out. But, we really wanted, we wanted to differentiate ourselves certainly from the original miniseries, which, is, completely linear, like the novel. And also we didn't want to sort of retread the same ground as Contagion, say. I mean, Steven Soderbergh is obviously a genius. That's a brilliant movie, but we didn't feel like we wanted to, painstakingly recreate it and do, 3 episodes of this sort of slow roll pandemic and watching, everybody die before we got to the Flag and Mother Abigail and the forces behind them and the conflict that really defines the story.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see what does change when things get adapted to different mediums, because it has to by necessity. And this, this is his most epic story, I would say, and it's his longest. I believe the uncut version of the novel is his longest book, which is saying something for Stephen King, because he can write quite long ones.
Yeah, so strange.
So how do you make those difficult choices when things inevitably have to get cut or have to deviate in some way because of the medium you're translating into? Is there stuff that was left out that you're like, oh God, I wish we could have found a way for that?
That's a great question. I mean, the short answer to how you make those decisions is deliberately. I mean, you really talk about it and think about it and discuss it with the rest of the creative team. And look, inevitably there's stuff that really hurts to lose, but I don't feel like I have any regrets about stuff we didn't include. I mean, look, Stephen King, it's funny because he's been adapted so many times, but in some way I think is actually quite difficult to adapt, because so much of the pleasure of his books is in the access he gives you to the internal lives of his characters and to secrets that they're keeping perhaps from everybody. I mean, everybody in their lives, but he's really giving you access to their brains and their psychology. And obviously, as soon as you are adapting it for a visual medium, all of a sudden those things need to be somehow externalized, either in some way that somebody looks or something that somebody says, and that just by its very nature changes things. Also, we look, I'm very proud that we were able to restore Rita Blakemore, which the original miniseries has Larry escaping New York with Nadine, and I completely get why you would do that. But I also, the Rita, that sort of sojourn that Larry and Rita have in an empty Manhattan is, it's such a magical part of the book for me, such a memorable part that, we really felt strongly we wanted to restore that. We also went into it, or certainly I went into it feeling, ooh, now we get the chance to do the kid, who also doesn't appear in the original miniseries. The kid is, this sort of very odd Stephen King kind of, I don't know, rockabilly psychopath, whatever he is, who picks up Trash Can Man on the road and gets him most of the way to Las Vegas and also brutalizes him. And, for a couple reasons, it just felt like that is not something that, an audience is kind of going to stick with us for, because it's so off story in a way that I think in a novel, especially a sprawling epic novel, I think you have license to do that. Like a reader will sort of go with you in a way that a viewer just may not. And ultimately the kid exists to brutalize Trash Can Man so that he can be kind of, crazy enough to end up doing what he does. And as soon as we saw what how Ezra Miller was playing him, we kind of felt like, well, you know what, we believe that he's crazy enough to do virtually anything. He doesn't need to be further brutalized. Like, clearly this person's been through something before the show starts. And we also felt like, well, you know, if the kid doesn't drive him to Vegas, then he kind of gets to Vegas the way anybody else does, which is he shows up there. He got there somehow.
Right.
How he gets, however he gets. So, you know, but your question is spot on. I mean, you know, there were all sorts of times when, you know, we would have to balance this, like, well, this is a really cool part of the book, but I'm not sure it plays on screen. Look, the Lincoln Tunnel is, you know,
Mhm.
is similar. I mean, both in terms of, you know, rendering the Lincoln Tunnel on screen is an extremely expensive and painstaking proposition, but also just in thinking about that sequence, you know, so much of the delight of it, or in the book for me, is this notion of being in really complete blackness, you know, which I think you'll agree is not going to play very well on screen. So, you know, where so much of what they know about sort of what they're stepping over or stepping on or going through is about what they're feeling. And you know, with their hands, and their hand sinks in somewhere, it's like, oh God, what is that? You know, again, watching 10 minutes of that on a black screen, I just, yeah, I'm not sure that that plays.
Well, they eventually all get to Randall Flagg or Mother Abigail, who are the two sort of central figures of good and evil. And Randall Flagg, he's played by Alexander Skarsgård in this adaptation, and you know, this concept of Stephen King sort of did this early on, of having the devil or the force of evil be this charming, handsome man that people would want to follow instead of just, you know, a typical demon. But that has been repeated now since The Stand so many times in so many different books and movies and shows. So, what was important about your depiction of Flagg to make him stand out against now all these sort of kind of copies that have come out since
No,
then?
that sure, that is a great question. I mean, you know, it's true that the characterization of Flagg has spawned so many imitations in the years since. And look, one thing I think is Alex's choice to play against the flamboyance that I think a lot of, you know, a lot of those imitators use when playing a sort of Flagg-like character. You know, that Alexander's performance really is, by and large, really pretty quiet and still and understated, which is not exactly what we were expecting, but turns out to be just a brilliant and you know, pretty ballsy choice that he made. You know, also, look, we wanted, it was very important to us that Flagg not just seem evil with a capital E, and that the people following him certainly not be uncomplicatedly evil. That we, you know, we really wanted, look, we wanted to use Flagg to get at some of the genuine appeal of, you know, these charismatic authoritarian strongmen who have, you know, been on the ascendancy, not just in this country, but around the world for the last number of years. And sort of what is the real appeal that guys like that are offering to people who aren't necessarily, you know, evil. As I say, you know, what are those people promising that is so appealing to so many? And, you know, it felt to us that we should always keep sight of the fact that, like, you know, especially in a world that's, you know, as in trouble as the world of The Stand is, but for people who have been through this unspeakable horror that all our characters have, you know, if you run into somebody who looks like Alexander Skarsgård, who's charming like Alexander Skarsgård, who can, you know, levitate, and who seems to have a real handle on what all this means, even if that turns out to be a lie to an extent, that he knows what it all means, or where it's all headed. You know, it felt to us like we needed to show that, oh, that really would be somebody who a number of people might follow, you know, because he's offering them some purpose, some meaning in all this awfulness that they've been through.
Yeah. Well, before I let you go, I did want to pick your brain about just this kind of structure of limited series has really been on a upward trajectory recently. There's a lot of them being produced now. Many of Stephen King's works have been translated into miniseries or limited series. And you've kind of worked in both. You've also, you worked on a more standard run of a series, like you were an Emmy nominee for Homeland. You've brought us Justified. But for this project and in the structure of a limited series, what do you think is the biggest benefit of this format of storytelling?
Yeah, I look, this to me, this is the only way really to do right by a novel. I mean, as you said, Stephen King's longest novel. I mean, to do right by a novel this epic and this sprawling, I think you need this, what is essentially this kind of new medium of this incredibly high-end limited series that's sort of a hybrid between, a feature and a TV show, right? I mean, it's got sort of a feature level scope and feature type budgets and effects and actors. And, so, but it's 9 hours long. And it just, obviously I know that there have been so many attempts to do The Stand as a feature. I mean, George Romero tried to do it as a feature. Affleck tried to do it as a feature. Obviously, Josh Boone was trying to do it as a feature before we ended up doing this limited series, and I can't really wrap my head around what that would look like. I mean, I think that for so many of these really sort of pretty epic stories, I feel like you need the room offered by this new medium. It doesn't feel like the other mediums are up to the challenge of it. You need that space to tell it, and I'm so grateful that we had it. It feels like it's such a, I mean, I guess it's why it was time, in part because the technology exists and the medium exists to really render this righteously.
Yes. Well, it was great to have it told in such a full, entire way. So thank you, Benjamin, and everyone who's out there
Thank you.
watching. Make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby. Keep up to date with us throughout the season. Benjamin, thank you so much once again.
Thank you. What a pleasure.